Good. Hello. I'm Hermione Lee and I'm the founder of the Life Writing Centre here at Wolfson, and I'm extremely happy to be chairing tonight's session. But before I come to the main event, I'd like to mention a few other OCLU items. If you haven't already put it in your diaries, do come to my conversation with the amazing poet, memoirist and novelist Jackie Kay here this coming Friday at 5:30. And do also note that Amy Tan, the legendary American writer and author of the Joy Luck Club, will be talking about her book on birds with the ornithologist Andrew Gosler on the 10th of June, also here, also at 5:30. And I would like to add that, to my pride and amazement, this year is the 15th anniversary of the Oxford Centre for Life Writing. We've got a subliminal 15 up there on the screen. And also to point out that while the college is our beloved home, we survive financially entirely on donations and private support. And our wonderful director, Kate Kennedy, who is here, is currently leading an appeal for funding to secure the centre's future. So if you'd like to help us or know of anyone you think might like to help us, please be in touch with her. Thank you. And now it's a great pleasure for me tonight to introduce Elleke Boehmer. Not that she isn't well known to us all, and indeed well known worldwide. Novelist, cultural historian, critic and biographer, she is Professor of World Literature in English here at Oxford, in the English faculty here at Oxford, Fellow of this college, Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and the Royal Historical Society, Honorary Fellow of St John's, Extraordinary Professor in English at the University of Pretoria, one-time visiting International Fellow at the University of Adelaide, Corresponding Fellow of the Australian Humanities Academy, and winner of many prizes and awards. And she is Executive Director of OCLU and a leading figure in all our activities. Elleke is the author of 8 monographs, including Post-Colonial Poetics, a short biography of Nelson Mandela, Indian Arrivals, Stories of Women, Gender and Narrative in the Post-Colonial Nation, Colonial and Post-Colonial Literature, Migrant Metaphors, and several edited volumes, including with Katie Collins, Life Writing and the Southern Hemisphere. And this year, she has published a groundbreaking work on Southern imagining, which she's going to talk with me about tonight. This new book offers an alternative perspective on our world, drawing on literature, science, material objects, landscape, and oral traditions to ask how we look at the world from the South rather than from the northern viewpoint. What is the South? What is far and what is near? What is it like to be living in places that from a northern perspective look remote, baffling, dangerous, and out on the edge? These questions are for us to pursue. And they're issues which Elleke has been thinking about for a long time, both in her criticism and in her fictions. These include the short stories, Sharmila and Other Portraits, and To the Volcano, the novels, Screams Against the Sky, Bloodlines, Nile Baby, The Shouting in the Dark, and now Ice Shock. This new novel tells the story of 2 lovers separated globally between an English academic environment and a research station in Antarctica, who are desperately and intensely trying to keep connection through different media and forms of communication. So this is going to work like this. We're going to start with talking about the novel. We're going to start with Ice Shock. Elleke is going to read a bit from the novel and then we'll talk about it. And then she will give us a reading from Southern Imagining and we'll open the conversation out from there. And after that, you're welcome to ask questions and then to join us in the cafe for book signing and drinks. So please make Elleke Boehmer very welcome.
Welcome everyone. It's my great joy to be here in conversation with Hermione, our founder director, at the Life Writing Center, which is very much my spiritual home here at Wolfson. Thank you all for coming on this very, very torrid day. I had wanted a sort of ice machine to kind of puff cool air out to us, but I think that would have been too expensive for the planet to endure yet another ice-making machine. So Hermione and I chatted a bit about what I might read, and settled on this passage, which is about an arrival in Antarctica on the part of one of the characters, Niall, who Hermione has just mentioned. The chapter is entitled Early November, Aurora, Southern Ocean. Aurora is the name. Niall's first... Can you hear me? Yeah? Niall's first iceberg was a blue crystal. It was small, trapezoid. It rose up as if from the deep sea, quite suddenly, though he had stood looking out all this time. After Gough Island, he'd kept his sea legs, thank God. He'd learnt to let the aurora's motion flow through his body. Once you knew how, it was a cinch. Every day, legs braced like a true seafarer, he took photos of the oncoming south, clear, steady pictures. They were in the higher 50s of latitude, the southwest winds pushing ever harder, rime covering the deck, but his feet stayed planted, and here on the inky dark sea floated this unexpected ice lantern drawing closer. Briefly, it loomed right beside them, deck high, the stripes of color streaming past, lichen, amethyst, and at eye level, a pale air blue streak like a slice of sky, a long ago sky suspended and held in the frozen water. He raised his Minolta and at the same instant saw the shape of the letter he'd write to Leia. An illustrated letter, a layering of words and photographs, their path south traced in stages, in bands, beginning with this photo. He'd create the effect of a moving viewpoint, each entry stepping closer to the continent, blocking out the scenes he didn't want to remember. The upturned faces at the dockside, the square of night sky above the courtyard house. In the radio room on the bridge, Niall found old printer paper. 4 days out of Gough, sailing southeast to the Weddell Sea, he wrote, his right hand doing less well than his legs, the letters sloping forwards and back. And there, suddenly, blue, unbelievably blue, stood our first iceberg. I caught a picture, but it won't do it justice. It was all the words for blue, sky, azure, and yes, also cobalt, a molten cobalt crystal. He printed the best photos on the rackety printer in the radio room. Impossible to send pictures electronically, Rick said. The files were too large, the bandwidth too small. Until they reached the McDonald's station, the email connection would be unstable, and even then. 5 days out, 3 to go. He tried holding his hand suspended above the paper to keep it steadier. Around the 60th parallel, the waves begin to rise to 6-7 meters. There are more icebergs of every shape and color you can imagine, jagged mountain ranges, rough crags, greens and pinks as well as blues, all steadily getting bigger. Before, I imagined icebergs were all pyramids, single white pyramids like Alps, standing upright in the water. At night, he tucked the letter under the logbooks beside the radar screen. In the morning, he pulled on his fingerless gloves and wrote on. The 6th day. Like the icebergs, the sooty albatrosses have increased in number. They plane over the deck, the huge wings weirdly quiet. Up to 3 this morning, surfing the white crests, silent as ghosts, angling themselves for a perfect albatross shot. Here, for you, a few of the best. He flexed his fingers. The wind shrieked under the cabin door, its pitch piercing, headachy. He hated the sound. It brought back that image, the picture he didn't want to see again, but that kept intruding between the door and his desk, the distraught woman with the cherry-scented lips and the eyes running coal. The moon's reflection melting into the corrugated iron roof. I imagine myself slicing through the deep blue latitudes he pressed on, an ice blue water droplet sliding down the layers of this planetary iceberg. On the 7th day, the swell turned huge. Massive puzzle pieces of pack ice bumped against the hull. A day or so more of sailing to go, and the sea is now pea-green. Plankton, Stan Stanfield, our marine biophysicist, says. A blue whale sighting, just the fluke, easily twice as large as the aurora, though a long way off. He returned to the surgery for another nausea shot. In the south layer, a constant arc of light, and the air cold and hard enough to knock on, like you once said. Then, the ice shelf inching into view, he at last saw her face. Today, this more than magical thing, my first ice blink experience, a mirror effect, the physicists say, projected through the clouds, and I kid you not, Lair, it imprinted your face on the sky. There were your eyes and the shape of your face, beautiful and looming and formidable, drifting in the air. And it was as if you had in fact come to say goodbye at the docks. I could imagine you looking across on the quay and waving. On the 8th day, they entered the shallow bight like a scoop in the ice shelf, the aurora nosing her way in, shadowed by a group of noisy skuas, small icebergs tilting around her bows.
You okay? There goes the mic.
Am I still audible?
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Good.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's fine. So, obviously, we're going to come on and talk about Southern Imagining later, but there are obviously deep connections between these two books, which go back a long way. And you say that in a footnote towards the end of Southern Imagining. You say, with hindsight, much of my writing, fiction and non-fiction, has been concerned with Southern worlds. And then you go on to tell us a bit about that. So, with this novel, how has your past work and your past life fed into the writing of this novel?
That's a big question.
Yep.
Perhaps I can approach it in this way. I have been preoccupied by what it is to write from the edge, be it a minority perspective, be it a borderline, be it, in this case, the edge of the world, the far edge of the world. And I should say that you will be seeing a range of photographs on the slides that figure in Southern Imagining and that depict some of the lenses through which I have looked at that far southern edge. So I've been preoccupied with those souths for quite some time. And it was finally, and I would say finally, because I've written a range of other books about Indian migration to Britain. I've written about, you mentioned stories of women. I've written about gender and the novel. I've written on a range of topics under the headings of kind of belonging and movement. And kind of having put in the miles or the years, I felt that I had finally given myself license to go all the way south. And you know, all the way south is not just the kind of the edges of the southern continents, kind of, you know, extending into the Southern Ocean, but the ultimate south,
Yes.
Antarctica.
And so you gave yourself the freedom to write a kind of love story,
Yeah.
to write a very, very personal story, which contains within it a lot of your bigger preoccupations. It's quite a painful love story, actually, but was it fun to do that? Was it fun to let rip and write a love story?
It was, yes, it was. There was a freedom in it, and also a pain, because love is difficult, and the challenges that the two young lovers set each other are very difficult for them both.
You make the stakes very high for them.
Yeah, the stakes are high. But I'm partly asking what it takes to love each other, what it takes to love across distance, what it takes to relate to each other across great distance. But yes, it was. I mean, let's be fair. A number of the topics that I've addressed over the years have been super serious, you know, and very earnest, and this remains super serious and very earnest. But it was also, there was a kind of, I'm back to that idea of giving myself license.
Okay, it's a very physical book. This passage that you read, I love the blue. In the passages is very much about colour. It's very much about, as it goes on, about darkness and light and the stars and a light that's almost unbearable and Arctic-like. It's also very much about noise, and I enjoyed the passages which were sort of almost unbearable to read because the noise is simply so loud. And also all the time he's describing this, he's also throwing up, which I think is a good touch. You know, sort of terrible physical circumstances of getting yourself, you know, to the Arctic. So it's as if it's impossible to talk about Antarctica, the extreme south, except through a kind of language of the physical. Did that come upon you as you were doing it, or did you deliberately set out to write a very physical, a book that's very tactile and visual?
Yes, because it was important to think about how two people remain in touch, right? Intact, how the couple remains intact and how the two people remain in touch across great distance. So I'm not saying this was always a conscious process, but in retrospect, I did do a great deal of kind of poring over photographs, listening to wind noise, and trying to capture that sense of kind of being there in that on that continent.
So that comes out of reading, that comes out of films, that comes out of listening to recordings
and listening to stories. I've been very hungry for Antarctic travellers' stories.
Travellers' tales.
Yeah.
And yet, I mean, that is absolutely my sense of the book, that you want to get us there and to have us feel what it's like to be there. But at the same time, it's a lot about the difficulty of describing. Niall struggles in different ways, many different ways, actually, to make Lear, the other side of the world, understand and feel his experience. And he does so through a kind of multimedia, different forms of communication, emails, phone calls that often go wrong, texts, photos, notebooks, storytellings. And when we get to Southern Imagining, of course, you'll be talking about a lot of different kinds of narratives. So was that a particularly interesting thing for you to do, to set out to do a sort of multimedia form of communication between these two people at opposite ends of the world?
Yeah, I mean, the central word there is weather. is
WEATH.
yeah, WEA, so climate, so temperature, what it means to relate to somebody that far away who is inevitably experiencing different weather. So that was a constant tempering of what they could experience together. I mean, maybe another quick thing to say for people in the room who haven't read the novel or haven't heard about it, is that it is set kind of by intention just before the era of the smartphone.
It's 2010,
so 2010 to 2013. So there is no way that being able to transport ourselves into other lives, other situations, to kind of live by proxy in that way, is not available to them. And then also, this is again on weather, the Antarctic weather is completely unpredictable. So you can set up a meeting, you can decide to have a phone call at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, but that may be entirely scuppered by the unpredictability of the weather. So I was very interested in trying to write a narrative which after all means and then, with these stochastic shocks of the weather and the climate constantly knocking at the couple.
Partly why you decided to structure it in quite short?
Yeah.
It's got fragmentary sections, and the paragraphs are very short, and there's lots of dialogue, which is often prosopopeic. It's often one-line dialogue, and that's what you wanted to get, that sense of flashes that could change very quickly. Yeah, that's interesting. In that passage that you read, there's this very extraordinary ending to that particular passage where he suddenly sees her imprinted, large as life, on an iceberg. And there are lots of weird kinds of communication going on throughout. He has a hallucinatory vision of her on the ship. He sees, when he's looking at stars, at one point they seem to take the shape of the Oxford skyline. Sort of an academic.
It might not be Oxford.
It might not be Oxford. Sorry, that was very parochial of me. And there are histories of telepathy, of course, and strange communication in a lot of Antarctic narratives, and you talk about that in the other book. So, what did you want to do with that? Why was that so important? That sense of telepathy or hallucination?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it is there in most Antarctic travelogues and narratives. They're weird effects. One of them is the ice blink, where images. It's a kind of like ice mirage, where images from very, very far away kind of glimmer on the horizon.
So ice blink is not your invention. Ice blink is a technical term.
It is a technical term. Okay. It's a phenomenon. Yes, And that was, I mean, it is also the case that telepathy was used before modern communications. Telepathy was used, a kind of willed telepathy by Antarctic explorers, travelers, in order to stay in touch with loved ones back home. So they would decide, on your birthday, I will, look at the moon at a particular time and think of you. Some of those effects, so I was working with actual physical effects, I was working with willed telepathy, but they were all techniques and also important plot devices whereby I could get the characters to be kind of mentally, emotionally present with the other one at a far distance, while also, of course, being present in the circumstances that they found themselves in.
Yes, well, that certainly has a very powerful and strange effect. That certainly works. And this thing of conjunctions, you call it strange conjunctions at one point, coincidences over time and space. Right at the, quite central to the book is a physics lecture which Lear goes to, where the lecturer is talking about, I'm quoting, how related events take place almost simultaneously in far distant places. And Leah calls this to herself, I think, unexpected collisions. So why are you so fascinated by this concept, which is a scientific concept, of unexpected collisions?
That's a fantastic question. It's also a difficult one.
It's a difficult concept.
Yeah, it's a super difficult concept. It's partly because, so in the novel, I play with the idea of here-ness, and also with that idea of, if you think about here and there, and then T/HERE, so a here that is also there. So where space is collapsed through the imagining of the two characters, kind of imagining that they are in touch. Because ultimately, even if we're really close or we're very far apart, we need to imagine each other. We need to bring the other person, however physically near or far, to mind. So we hold each other in mind. So there's something about emotion and imagination.
Yes, you're
there.
talking about it in a humanist way, as it were, in terms of emotion, closeness, imagination. But within the novel, there is certainly a try at giving this a kind of scientific basis, that it's not just fantastical to think in terms of strange conjunctions, that such things do in fact happen.
Yes, but then there's the flip side of that. So that when, for example, Niall tries very hard to conjure a concatenation, to make it possible for himself to be teleported into Leia's situation, it has to do with the boat race. So that fails. Sorry, that's a spoiler, but that fails. But when it's not by design, it sometimes does work. There are these conjunctions across space and time. So on the level of storytelling, I was inspired throughout, as I am in all my practice, by Thomas Hardy.
I was just coming to him, actually.
And that way in which coincidence, perhaps in some of the novels too much so, but coincidence is something, and the missed letter, or the concatenation, the coming together that where the lovers don't quite meet.
Yes, the person doesn't turn up quite in time, or the letter goes under the carpet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was very inspired by that.
Yes.
And kind of, which was a great delight, sat at the feet of Thomas Hardy again.
So, very unexpected collision that you should bring this up now, because I was just about
there you go.
So Leah is writing a thesis on Hardy, and what she calls his inscription of the natural world. And she gives a talk in which she tries to show how Hardy does landscape, how he revels in what she calls the density of the thing, which is what in Southern Imagining you give the technical term haekitas, thinginess, here-ness. Hardy, as you say, is also very big on coincidences. And I wanted to give you back to you two Hardy quotes that you use. One is from the novel and one is from Southern Imagining. The one from the novel is from The Woodlanders, Hardy's novel, The Woodlanders, and it says this: looked at in a certain way, their lonely courses formed no detached design at all, but were part of the pattern in the great web of human doings then weaving in both hemispheres from the White Sea to Cape Horn. I can imagine the great cry of joy of which you landed on. And then in a footnote in Southern Imagining, you refer to the novel A Pair of Blue Eyes, and his description of a wedding in a Devon church, which, this is Hardy, might be witnessed from the deck of a ship on a voyage to the South Seas with a good glass. And you observe that Hardy's been clearly reading about astronomical discoveries and black holes and so on. So not so much in terms of coincidences, but in terms of Hardy's sense of the Southern Hemisphere. How come he's so useful to you? I mean, how did that work for you?
In a nutshell, Hardy's imagination is planetary. He could not have written either of those two lines without thinking about the world holistically. And for those who in the room who might know his incredible poem, The Dynasts, his eye is filmic. He's constantly kind of roving across the, in that case, across the theatre of Europe and observing the Napoleonic Wars. So, in a nutshell, he was a model for me of how to think of the planet as a whole. And I mean, he got it from, he's one of the few writers who I found particularly inspiring in the writing of both books, who never traveled south of the equator. But it was his reading, and in particular his reading in astronomy, that took him there.
Is that unusual at that time? I mean, I've been reading Richard Holmes's book on Tennyson, which you've probably seen, on the young Tennyson, and how deeply fascinated Tennyson was by all kinds of new scientific discoveries, and really, really well read. And I'm sure that there are many other examples, but do you think Hardy was exceptional in having that planetary view of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it was a time, Hardy's time, when there wasn't the divide between the so-called sciences and the arts or the humanities, which I also think is another science, as all sort of art, of knowledge gathering and knowledge and analysis. But there wasn't that divide, so people read, eclectically and kind of, right across the piece. But I think, Hardy was an autodidact, and he read voraciously, and he read in order to understand more of the world beyond Europe, and he sees the world. I was talking right at the beginning about seeing the world from the edge, and that's what he does.
Yes, and also, as in your novel, he's profoundly interested in nature, in colour, in landscape, in the sky. All of those things presumably are somewhat inspirational to you in thinking about him when you're writing this.
Yeah, he also thinks physically. He thinks in terms of the physics. There's a qualifier. This wedding in Devonshire would be observable by somebody at Cape Horn with a good glass.
Yes, very good.
Although he's not thinking of the curvature of the Earth, but
he's thinking of an enormous telescope,
a big periscope in the sky.
Yes, very good. So, in talking about Hardy, we've, as it were, segued a little bit into thinking about the links between the novel and the critical scholarly book. So, would this be a good moment to get a little bit of a reading from Southern Imagining?
Sure.
Thanks.
And I might go back there, because I abandoned my water glass over there, and I've been feeling the need for it. So, remembering to keep all my equipment with me, I will come back here. That's a glacial valley in Namibia in front of you there. Right. So we've been talking about a love affair between two individuals, one in Antarctica, one in England. This blue book kind of rotates around a central chapter which is about the Antarctic. As a subject, Antarctica has inspired both fascination and terror. Approaching this crucial central chapter about the icy continent, I have felt both. For any writer, I imagine, the landmass throws up the formidable challenge of how to give it expression. Before the 19th century, it had seen no human history. It has no Aboriginal language. Antarctic names, including those for ice, are exclusively North-derived. It is the most isolated place on Earth and the most silent when the wind drops. It lacks flora and fauna, bar the birds, seals, and penguins that inhabit its shores and the surrounding pack ice. Even so, in a book like this, a chapter on imaginative responses to the great ice was unavoidable. And yet, I delayed beginning. There were days when I felt like a sailor in a Jules Verne story about the ends of the earth, being swept relentlessly towards some final reckoning. So my excitement can be imagined when, in early 2022, while reading and thinking about Antarctica, a wonderful true story about human contact and historical rediscovery on the ice burst into the news. In March 2022, after a years-long search marked by frequent setbacks, Antarctic explorer Ernest Shackleton's ship Endurance was found on the bed of the Weddell Sea. It had last been seen on the 21st of November 1915 when, beset and crushed, the ship finally sank, the sea ice closing over it like a trap. The 2022 recovery project had been mounted by the Falklands Maritime Marine Trust and sailed on the South African icebreaker Agulhas II, captained by Durban-born Knowledge Bengu. On board were polar geographers, scientists, and marine archaeologists of several nationalities, one of whom, the Falklands-born expedition director Menson Bound, described the shipwreck as the best preserved he had ever seen, by far. The absence of wood-eating microorganisms in Antarctic waters had left the Endurance more or less in the state it was when it went down, although broken at its stern. There, in the deep, cold seawater, 3 kilometers down, at 68 degrees south, the photography showed history standing suspended. Once felled by an icy chaos of churning, tumbling destruction, its rudder torn away, the ship was now upheld by the deep sea itself. Shackleton's intention in 1914 had been to complete a trans-Antarctic expedition via the South Pole, in some sense making good, yet also overtopping his rival Robert Scott's fateful 1912-13 journey. In the event, however, he and his crew failed to reach even the near coastline. By the year's end, ice had impeded the Endurance. The ship then drifted over 100 miles northwest, rotated by, quote Shackleton, the irresistible clockwise sweep of the Weddell Sea. Yet, though ice floes had ruthlessly squeezed the vessel, in Shackleton's words in his memoir, South, the oak boards were twisted and actually bent by the stresses. It had remained lying upright on the sandy seabed. The ship's wheel, the porthole to Shackleton's cabin, the library books scattered on the sea floor, the name Endurance in raised gold lettering, so many things uncannily resembled the images that the expedition photographer Frank Hurley had taken in the days before the ship went down. Bar the pale sea creature like an anemone, rakishly punctuating the A of Endurance. Soon after the sinking, the crew had set out on their now mythic 850-mile journey, first on foot across the ice pack, dragging 3 lifeboats, then over the wind-torn Southern Ocean to Elephant Island, from where Shackleton and 5 others sailed on to South Georgia to seek rescue. The 2020 undersea images laid alongside these gave Bound an uncanny sense of the past brushing against the present. You really do feel the breath of the great man upon the back of your neck, he wrote. For me, following the news from Cape Town, Agulhas II's home harbour, the story said something important about the farthest south, something perverse but true that encouraged me at last to broach the ice and begin this chapter. It was not that the discovery of Endurance appeared to have brought the famous tale full circle, to have rounded the unintentional parabola of the Shackleton's team's clockwise route, significant as that was, or that, in a world in which stories from the South rarely, if ever, feature in the world's newspapers, these events told a welcome tale of a southern nation's part in an international achievement. It was rather that, despite everything, endurance remained out of reach. This, to me, was the bottom line. The ship had been located and photographed, yes, but at 3,000 meters, which marine archaeology defines as hyperdepth, that is where she will remain, at least for the foreseeable future. Even if retrieval were possible, Antarctic treaty protocols insist that monuments like the Endurance cannot be removed. Polar history in 2022 may have closed a circle, but we will not be seeing the wheelhouse or the strewn library books up close anytime soon. Up close is the experience that Antarctica finally denies.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, it's a thrilling story and very grippingly told. Before we plunge deeper in there, just for clarification and just for the benefit of the audience, what is the South? And is the South in this book the same thing as the global South?
No, is the short answer to the second question. The South is, and you can imagine that I'm often asked this. This made sense to somebody that who I was having a conversation with the other day. The South is the continents, islands, whose weather is tempered by the Antarctic. It is the littorals, the coastlines, and the kind of peninsular feelers of South America and Southern Africa that extend towards into the Southern Ocean. So the far south is, another way of putting it, just in short, because I'm rambling, the far south is the end of the earth. It's the historical, conventional end of the earth. It's the mythic place that Jules Verne writes about in some of his adventure stories. It is it's the kind of the ne plus ultra of Cook. It is the outside of the world, but it's still part of the world.
Okay, so there wasn't a map in the book, and that interested me. You deliberately didn't. I kept turning the pages to see if there was going to be a map which said the South starts here, like one of those treasure quest maps. We say arrow here, and there'd be a red line dotted along the bottom of various continents, and then there was the Antarctic, and I was there, and you would say this bit in blue is the South, and the rest is the North or somewhere else. But you didn't do that. Though you might have imagined that a reader like me would be going, where's the map?
A mental note, perhaps a map is needed.
No, but I thought you deliberately didn't do it.
Well,
because you wanted it to be porous at the edges.
Yes, it is porous, because it's imaginatively porous. It is a mythic sorry to interrupt. But it is inhabited by people. And people have written back from there, even though the global north, and I am using that term advisedly, does not generally have the ears to hear it.
We're going to come back to that crucial political point about the book. So in your account of what you're doing in this book, I'm very struck by your use of the word athwart, as here. This is you. Southern imagining works athwart ideas of singular worlds and cross-cuts the northern sight lines that have always been projected onto southern lands. Or here, talking about some of your major literary examples, Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Darwin's The Voyage of the Beagle, Melville's Moby Dick, you say, The journeys into the South that the texts describe all bring their protagonists to the point of beginning to view the North from the outside athwart. So can you talk to us about athwart?
Everything about the southern view of the North is athwart. It's topsy-turvy. It's the other way around. This is something as I often do when talking about this book. I just ask my interlocutor, the people I'm talking to, who has not been south of the equator in the room? No, you've been to Australia.
No. Oh, Australia, yes. I forgot about Australia. You see, I'm so confused.
Okay, so it is...
Oh, everyone has been.
It's always an interesting kind of litmus to this athwart that I'm trying to capture in the book.
By athwart, I take it you mean cutting across,
yes,
or looking looking sideways on.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Or skew-if, or
skew-if.
Yeah.
Askew.
Askew.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Off kilter,
Yeah.
not quite
Yes.
lining up in the way that we might expect.
And this is how the South has been seen by the North, but this is also how people living in the various areas of the South that you're writing about think of the North. It's mutual athwartness.
Yes and no, because and we're talking about 1 in 10 of the world's population. So only 11% of the world's population lives in the southern hemisphere, and that includes the very populous nations of Brazil and Indonesia, kind of south of the equator. So the southern people, to use a generalization, always think of themselves, and I'm one of them, always think of themselves in second guess mode, because you're always correcting for the northern view. You are seeing yourself as seen by from a northern perspective, but you're also grounded in your own space.
Yeah. Just to be devil's advocate for a moment, in doing what you've described, running many different countries or parts of many different countries together as the South, is there a problem of making them all sound too similar? So when you talk about how, I quote, interconnected southern perceptions have looped and arced around the hemisphere, you also immediately have to note that this is not to overlook the many differences between them, but isn't there in fact a problem in yoking together, say, South America, Australia, New Zealand and Antarctica? I mean, how did you decide to deal with that problem? Or maybe it's not a problem.
It wasn't a problem, partly because I have written so extensively before and felt the confines of national definition. Nations insist on singularity, and what was fantastically liberating about writing the far south and thinking about the far south is that that kind of demanded diversity. It demanded a sense of straddling, a lateral perspective, a movement hither and yon, and which was incredibly liberating, because we are living in an age of kind of great power nationalism and defended nations.
Yes. But if I was to say, I don't know, a New Zealander, mightn't I be cross or put out at being lumped together with someone living in
Buenos Aires?
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to find an example that's very remote. Wouldn't I object and say, but my life's not a bit like that?
Yeah, but I allow that in the book. But I would insist that there are commonalities of experience, the sense of, it's there, and there's a remarkable Argentine short story writer, novelist, Samantha Schweblin. It's there in her work, it's there in Janet Frame, who's a New Zealander. It's there in the work of the South African writer Zoe Wickham. This sense of farness, of their voices having to be pitched from very, very far away and having to translate across that distance. But therefore, because that's a shared experience across, I mean, I've it knocked into me rather than me going out to find it.
Yes.
The more I read of Argentine fiction about the Pampas, the more I read of Patagonia, the more I read in, say, Namibian travelogues, the more the sense of being very, very far away. And having to adjust to another perspective came through.
And to go to something quite precise. I mean, you do, for instance, give some very fascinating accounts about how different peoples in very different parts of the world create animal shapes in the constellations, for instance. That something like that, something which you might think of as it were, culturally specific. I see an emu in the Milky Way, or some those sorts of processes, ways of seeing, do cut across very different lands or skies.
Yes. Yes. And there's that sense which you get in John Frame, you get in a number of the Argentine writers that I've looked at. There's always that sense of the proximity of Antarctica. It is just there across the ocean, tempering the weather.
We talked when we were talking about the novel, we talked about the kind of multimedia use of forms of communication that there is in that novel. Now, in this book, you have a large choice of media. I mean, there's a huge amount of extraordinarily varied material that goes into this. I mean, the research is phenomenal. Novels, travel writings, maps, poems, logbooks, Indigenous songs and stories, photographs, objects, and more. So you knew, presumably when you set out on this big process of Southern imagining, that there was going to be a huge amount of stuff to deal with and a huge amount of very different stuff. How did you choose? How did you select? How did you shape?
There were a number of criteria, and I'm probably not going to be able to kind of embrace them all.
Samples.
Yeah. I was particularly fired up by and drawn to works that were navigational, that where the poem. I mean, I include two epic poems where the novel, where the travelogue itself was aware of moving through space, and when the Portuguese explorers first, made their way kind of as in a leapfrog fashion down the African continent to try to get to India, they used ship's rutters. They are descriptions of the coastline. It kind of incrementally recorded, stage by stage by stage. Every time, with each voyage, they went a little further, so they were able to add to the rutter. In all, I would say, all of the pieces of writing that I talk about and I read in Southern Imagining work in that incremental way. They navigate their way south or across the south in a way, which is I think why that passage was a good passage from Ice Shock, was a good passage to begin with, because there you also see the Aurora, the ship, kind of moving through the bands of latitude to the south.
And also one of the things the book does very well, I think, Southern Imagining, is to show how people who have written about the Antarctic, even if they haven't been there, but if only or if they have, are accumulating the past in order to go on pioneering. So there's a very strong sense of an accumulation of data, of texts, of records, which you then add to Darwin in the Beagle or whatever, and then you create another record. And so your word incremental is very fundamental, I think, to the whole process of the book.
Yeah, but it's also about observation. It's about incremental noticings. You like a travelogue. You notice, and then you're able to move on a stage.
And the book is also very carefully shaped. You use the word parabola quite a lot, and you talk about pliability of form. You obviously thought a lot about how to shape this book. Mm-hmm. Can you give us a sense of how you set about doing that?
I mean, again, it like some of the images of farness and nearness and will telepathy. It came to me by and by. There was a kind of enchantment or a bewitchment to it. As I was saying in the passage I read, I didn't want to include an Antarctic chapter. I would have been perfectly happy to leave that out, but it insisted itself upon my attention. And once it was there, it became the pole.
Feel central.
Yeah, it became the pole around which everything else kind of circles, but there's also a temporal arc in the book, in that everything moving towards the Antarctic chapter, I mean, there's a parabola shape there. Everything moving towards the Antarctic chapter has to do with the mythic past, and then the early modern, and then into the 19th century. Yeah. Then we're in Antarctica, and then we move on to
contemporary work,
through the modern period into contemporary.
So you did have a chronological narrative, as your kind of tapeworm.
But it kind of arced south and then came back again. Yeah.
And the essence seems to be to try and find out through all these different kinds of texts what, as you put it, what is this here? And we've talked a little bit about this before, but it's about how to write the thinginess, the haikitas, the here-ness of the Southern Hemisphere. And you twice quote a character in a novel which I don't know, called Carpentaria, by the Indigenous Australian author Alexis Wright. And this is the quotation from this character: "Sing this time, only that place called such and such. This way, remember, don't mix it up." That quote's obviously very important to you. Can you say a bit more about that?
The character who's Joseph Midnight, he's instructing a younger character who is lost in various ways how to escape from the situation he's in, and how to find out more about his ancestral past. And in order to do that, he has to sing a song. I mean, I don't want to use, it's been overused, but he's giving him a way of tracking the journey that he has to take, which he's never taken before, although Joseph Midnight has, of taking that journey by speaking a story to himself and remembering the route in that way.
Yeah. So this is about creating space as you go along, or knowing space, untraveled space as you go along, through something that's been remembered or learned.
Yes, through something that has been experienced by others and gathered and passed on. Something that, in a way, it's obvious, but it kept jumping out at me as surprising and amazing. That great navigators like Cook, for example, or Fitzroy, who was the captain of the Beagle, they were dependent on the accumulated knowledge of other mariners who they poured over those logbooks. And Cook, for example, is put out and confused by the fact that Bulkley's Island is not, 50 miles offshore of the Falklands to the west. And actually it's Pepys's Island, and he keeps, they named it after Samuel Pepys, he keeps trying to corroborate this accumulated knowledge of the past.
So there's a very interesting parallel here between written texts and oral traditions, which one thing you're crossing between.
and as a halfway stage between them, there's something about the logbook, which is, after all, just a series of notations, not vastly unlike Joseph Midnight, kind of sketching the route that Will, the younger character, has to take in that quotation that you read.
This knowing where you're going, or finding out where you're going, or being aware of where you are, which is absolutely essential to everyone in this book, whether they're on sea or on land, links to a obviously very strong environmental theme throughout this book, from Moby Dick's account of whaling to the terrible stories of the erasure of indigenous peoples, to the rising oceans and climate change. So you say, thinking south is vital for our survival on this planet. And the question is, so how does this book help? How so? How does thinking south help with all that?
It helps because thinking from the south, or thinking south, is, I would submit, a way of seeing the planet whole. We tend to see our planet as entirely dominated by the geopolitical action that happens across the great Eurasian landmass and into North America, across the Bering Strait. If we intuitively, conventionally also, think of the planet in a north-dominated way. If we learn through our reading, through our viewing, to think from the south, to imagine from the south, the planet emerges as I would argue, as a whole. And to illustrate, I've got in the book a number of ways of kind of corroborating this and enlarging on this. But a factor often used is that the Southern Ocean is warming at a far greater rate. So the Southern Ocean is the great rotating, powered by these very, very strong currents around Antarctica, right? It sort of rushes. It's what you take if you're trying to race a yacht around the world. You go down to the roaring 40s and you spin around the planet that way. You can't do it anywhere else. That ocean is warming at a far greater rate than any other ocean. That is important for all kinds of reasons, including that ocean, it's a very cold ocean. It powers all the great currents that cool the land masses to the north. But this warming has been taking place since about the late 80s, early 90s. It was only noticed by some canny marine scientists in Australia and in South Africa in around 2014, 2015. And now it's being studied. And that period of not noticing is something that I'm trying to, obviously not in an explicit way, but that's what I'm trying to correct. To correct in this book.
Is there a danger, again, just for a second, we're coming towards opening this out, but of being devil's advocate again, is there a danger of coming away from the book, if you were reading it not sympathetically? Somebody saying, well, so north is always wrong then, is it? Northern paradigms are always misleading. Because you do have some pretty hefty judgmental phrases about maintaining hemispheric solidarity and having protocols for oceanic thinking and so on. There's quite a bit of flag waving. I don't mean flag waving, but and you sometimes seem just kind of blanketly very down on the northern paradigm. No, is that unfair?
It's a little unfair.
Okay.
Partly because I am labouring under the contradiction throughout the book, and we all are when we're talking about thinking from the south, that the northern paradigm informs us all. It's where we're all located. It's
it's
where we've all
yeah.
been educated.
Exactly.
You know, the northern paradigm is what we grapple
No, and
with.
you're very explicit about that. Yeah. So one last question from me. This seems to me almost more than the novel, actually, a deeply personal book to you, and it often, and towards the end particularly, has quite a strong emotional tone. So you talk towards the end about landing in Africa or landing in Australia, and you say this: "Wherever I touch down, strong feelings of recognition sweep through me. I raise my face to the incomparable light and feel the air seethe round my body. And no matter where this is, I know that somehow I am home. My being, my writing is in its place again. My mood compass, always yearning south, has come to rest." So that somehow is doing some very interesting work in that passage. And I know we could start from scratch and have an hour's conversation about this now. But can you talk about that sense of arrival, or somehow coming home to the south, that you always have?
It has to do with not being out of kilter. Whenever I'm in the south, I know exactly where I am. I know where the sun is in the sky. I know what the stars will look like in the night sky, and their shape and their orientation. It's kind of the opposite of when D.H. Lawrence was traveling in Western Australia and New South Wales. He was extremely, there was a lot going on in his life at that time, but he felt almost unwell. He was so out of kilter. And he talks about, in his novel Kangaroo, he talks about these gashes in the atmosphere. And he kind of can't look at them because he'll grow dizzy and get confused.
It's the opposite for you.
It's the opposite.
Yeah. So you are not athwart when you are
No,
south.
no.
Yeah, thank you.
I mean, somebody sort of lightheartedly, I think, said that Southern Imagining was obviously my great yowl of homesickness during COVID when I couldn't go south of the equator.
Yeah, well, it is sort of imaginatively homesick. That's very clear. Yeah, and I think that's part of what gives it its oomph. If we could bring the lights up a bit, possibly, then I'm sure there might be questions. And if people have to go for their dinners or anything now, before we start the questions, now would be a good time to slip out. But everybody wants to stay, so that's nice. So, questions?
You're also very welcome to ask for further elaboration about the books, because we've only been able to touch on.
When you've got two books to talk about.
Thank you, Professor Boehmer and Professor Lee. I have a question about your writing habit, because one is fiction, another one is scholarly book. So, what's the difference between the two kind of writing for you, and which one make you feel happier? Thank you.
There's a huge. Can you hear me? Yeah. There's a huge difference in the different kinds of writing. But then I would also say there's a difference between, because I write short stories and I write longer fiction, there's a difference in managing those or managing in executing those different kinds of writing. So it isn't a binary of, critical prose here and fiction over here. They're different strands, and they are more entangled than they seem. But I think what is absolutely essential is that each one can be read and enjoyed on its own terms. Then they don't need to be read in conjunction, even though, as might have been clear from what we've been saying, there are conjunctions. Which gives me more joy? Writing gives me joy. To write gives me a lot of pleasure. Otherwise, I wouldn't. I wouldn't persist.
Does the fiction go far? Is it faster? The fiction, does it come pouring out faster or not? No, not at all.
No, no.
Yes, up at the back, and then there on the.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Just to follow on from that, I was curious about the process of writing two books at the same time, and wondering, was the fiction informed by the critical writing or vice versa? How did you find the process of working on, it sounds like, two books at the same time? So if you could speak a little bit more about that, please, Elleke.
I hope I can do your question justice. I didn't ever write the two books at the same time. I think that's really important. There were, as it were, two different easels in different rooms, different chambers of my head space, anyway. And it was important that, especially because of the ice theme that joins them to an extent. We've kind of highlighted that for the purposes of today's talk. So it's maybe not as as much of an element in some of the chapters of Southern Imagining, or indeed some of the chapters of Ice Shock. But it was important to keep clear blue water between the different projects. And what I can say is that when it became impossible, during the COVID period to travel and therefore to carry out research for this book, the novel became a way of traveling. And what I was saying about the rutta, the way in which writing makes possible the next stage of writing, I think that is something that it was a principle that informed both books.
One on
the making of both books.
Mm-hmm.
Hiya, thank you very much. It was a really interesting talk. I have lots of questions, but I'll try and keep it limited. First of all, you mentioned just at the end kind of possible influence from D.H. Lawrence. Mm-hmm. Can you expand a little bit on that? I mean, were you kind of reading a lot of his travel writing and kind of involving that in your process at all?
Yeah, I mean, what does he call it? The quote is his strange pilgrimage, I think. I found it very interesting that he set out on this long journey. He took this long parabola, through what's now Sri Lanka, then Ceylon, into the southern hemisphere. He makes it all the way to New Zealand, to Wellington Harbour, where his dear friend and sometime collaborator, although it was a difficult friendship, Katherine Mansfield came from. He finally sees what she saw, and what she experienced. He writes about this, and he sends her a postcard, with just sort of one word on it. I remember. So Lawrence took that risk. I think that taking that parabola, that strange pilgrimage into the far south, is, it's not everyone's cup of tea. It's not a challenge for everyone. But Lawrence undertook it, and I found it very interesting that he writes an entire novel. I don't think it's a very good novel, but he writes an entire novel called Kangaroo, which is, it's a lopsided novel in the same way as the kangaroo is a kind of, well, certainly to Captain Cook, is a lopsided sort of creature, unexpected creature, small at the top, kind of mighty and weighty in its lower half. So, there are aspects of Lawrence's journey south and what he did with it in terms of the material he generated out of it. He also wrote a poem called Kangaroo, both a novel and a poem, that I found inspiring.
And when you're writing about kangaroo, I mean, there's very interesting material about, you talk quite a lot about the way in which writers who are looking at the South from outside talk in terms of strangeness and grotesqueness and oddness and alienness. And Lawrence is useful to you there, isn't he? Because of the kind of strangeness and otherness that he seems to be finding everywhere.
Yeah, which he relates to because he's
indeed
he's strange and
he's
other.
pretty strange.
Yeah.
Yes, here.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Really fascinating. And sorry if my question was covered in the first few minutes of the talk because I missed the beginning. But I was interested in your relationship with Antarctica. And from what I've gathered, you haven't been. Is that right? Or you have been?
It's a question I choose to sidestep.
You choose to sidestep. Fascinating.
I didn't ask you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm fascinated with that. Are you? Then don't answer that. But are you interested in going, having written the book? And I'm asking from someone who is fascinated and wants to go, and has a tendency to write what I experience, and I travel all over the world for my work, for my writing, etc. So just really interested in what your relationship is from now, having written.
Right.
This may be a sidestepping sort of response to that interesting question. We've been talking about the far southern edge and these continents and islands tempered by Antarctica. There's something about the far southern edge. It was there in the second reading, actually, that you can approach but never quite reach. The tactile is something that actually thwarts us as travelers or as readers. So I have great fun in parts of the book with the idea of the asymptote. For those who are not in the room, who are not mathematicians, the asymptote is a line that endlessly approaches a curve into infinity without ever intersecting with it. And that's, I see Antarctic travelers, including the guys who made it to the pole, never actually quite getting there. And so, I'm fascinated by the fact that the South Pole, the pole, is on a kind of featureless, icy plain. There's absolutely nothing there. There's now a kind of cairn of rock, and there's a big Antarctic station that has been set up there. But when Amundsen and Scott first got there, there's nothing. There's nothing to touch. You can't ever quite reach it. So maybe that's another definition of the far south. It's that which always eludes our touch.
Yes, that's so interesting. And I do think that one of the themes that runs underneath actually both these books is a sense of infinite ambition and aspiration, and also being thwarted, not quite getting where you want to be or what you want. And that's a very interesting theme. Unlike these two penguins here in front of me, which I should just like to say in passing, are nothing to do with me. Thank you very much. It's wonderful.